In today's video, we're going to take a look at how to vertically align elements in CSS. Seemingly a very simple task that can become complex if you don't know what you're doing. So, I'm going to start here with a simple container. Let's say container, like that. I'm going to add a span and says, I don't know, this is a description. All right, perfectly fine. If we refresh, we see this text here. I zoomed in a bit so that everybody can see. Let's add to the style of it. I'm going to add to the container a background color. Let's say dark cyan, I guess. But I'm going to make it a little bit lighter so that we can see the black text on it. All right, perfectly fine, that works. And now we can see that, well, of course, the text right now is vertical aligned to the container because it's the same size. What do you know? But if we change the height of this container, so let's say we have a different height for whatever reason, now things become interesting because it is no longer vertically aligned. How do we do this? And for those of you that are like in a hurry, I'm going to start with the best way that you can probably do this and everybody recommends. And we're going to go over all the other ways that exist out there. So first, the best way to do it is to simply set this container to have a display flex, right? So I'm going to change it to be a display flex. And for the span itself, so container span, set its alignment, so align self to be center. All right, and now if we refresh, you will notice that it is vertically aligned. And the cool part about this is it works for as large of a height as you might need. So even if I say 70 pixels, it's still vertically aligned. Or it works especially well if you have multiple lines of text. So if I do this, it still is vertically aligned perfectly as you would expect. And I choose align self on the span. You can also do align items on the container itself. That would apply this alignment to all the elements that you have in the container. So just keep that in mind, but it also works the exact same way. All right, so this is the first method of vertically aligning the elements inside the container, but let's go over a couple more ways that exist out there on the internet. You might have heard about it, you might have tried them, and they never quite worked well. So the first one is, well, I'm going to remove all this, right? We no longer need the flex here, and I'm going to remove all this text here because that's a bit too much. And the first one is to simply calculate a spacing that we need to add to the text, right? To the text here at the top of the text between it and the top of the container for it to be centered. Well, that's a very easy task actually. So what we have to do is first take a look at the height of the text, which in my case is 17.67 pixels exactly. And of course the container is 50. So if we bring in the calculator here, we can just calculate this. So we say 50 minus 17.67 pixels. So that's the difference between it. 32.33 pixels are like the actual empty space. So the space before or below the text in this case. And since I want the same amount of space to be at the top as at the bottom, we can just divide this empty space by 2, and now we get the spacing that we need, 16.165 pixels. Perfect. So we can just say for this span, we can just add here margin top 16.165 pixels, right? Well, no. Well, this doesn't work on inline elements, so we're gonna have to change it to be a type block. All right, that's fine, but if we refresh, this time it did something, but not what we expected. What happened? Well, the long story short here is, as you can see, the span actually has that margin here at the top. This orange box is the margin, but it applied to the container as well. Basically, the margin overflows to the container if, for example, it's actually the first element in here, because this element doesn't have anything above it, it just overflows to the container, and the container says, okay, well, I'm gonna need to have 16.165 pixels between the top of myself, top of the container, and the top of the page. Okay, and that's what it does. And now we have 16.165 pixels between the container and the top of the page, which is not what we want. All right, so to fix this, a solution would be to change this to be a padding type of spacing. And that's another way of doing it that kind of works in some specific cases, right? We had to change the display type and we had to add padding. to it. Now, the third way of doing this would be to just add this padding to the container itself. So instead of having this display block and span here, we can just move the padding top to the container. And if we have padding to the container instead of the spacing, it shouldn't make any difference, right? Well, it actually did, and it made the container 66 pixels. That's not great. And that is because of the box sizing, right? By default, we are using the content box as the box sizing, which is usually what you don't want. You want to use the border box, and many frameworks like Bootstrap actually sets this box sizing to be border box by default. And that's what we're gonna do here with the container. And now the height actually includes the padding that we have added here. So it's going to be 50 pixels with the padding. Before it was just 50 pixels without the padding. So it was 66 in total. If we refresh, of course, it works. Okay, so that's kind of the same, almost the same implementation, except the padding is on a different element. Great. Now here's where things become more interesting, because we're going to take a look at a more popular way of vertically aligned elements, and that is using vertical align, the property that's supposed to vertically align elements. Right, so we're going to take a look at that right now. We're going to change this so that we no longer have this padding. And of course, if I save, it should be the same. And I'm going to change this to be vertical align. I'm going to set it to, of course, middle. What else? We want to vertically align it to the middle of the page. And if I refresh, nothing happens. Absolutely nothing happened. That is because the vertical align property works with the table cell display type. So we're going to have to change again the display type of our span. So from inline to be table cell. Either that or create a table with table and TD and whatnot. But we're just going to use the display types here. I'm going to have to change also the display type of our container. I'll say display table. So it's basically now considering this container a table with table cells. Okay, that's perfectly fine. And if we refresh, it is indeed vertically aligned. It's just that now the container doesn't use the whole width, which can be fixed by just setting the width to 100%. That's fine. And all right, that actually is a solution, and that's one of the solutions that's recommended in many answers of Stack Overflow. Now the next method to vertically align the elements would be to just simply set the line height. This only works for inline elements, so we can say here line height, and we're going to set it to be the exact same value as the height of the container. So we can say 50 pixels, and now if we refresh, of course it is going to be aligned vertically. And the last method would be to absolutely position the element. So what we can do is say here position absolute. All right, so that's the first step, and just doing that doesn't really change anything. We're gonna have to make the container be a position relative, so the absolute element is relative to it. I'm gonna say here position relative. Okay, perfect. And then what we're gonna do is just change the top property to be 50%. All right, so now we should see that it is vertically aligned, and it's not, because here this top 50% just specifies the top side of the element that we want for it to be at 50%, the height of the container, which it is. If we select it, we can notice that the top part of it is actually at the exact middle, but we actually need to move it backwards for half the element's height so that this would be properly aligned. Now for this there are a couple of ways. One of them would be to just set a margin top, so I can just say margin top and minus this 16.67 that's divided by 2 is 8.3, so 8.335 pixels. If we refresh, of course that works, although a better solution would be to actually use a transform here. So you can say transform, translate y and minus 50%, because that's here we can specify percentages related to the height of the element, which is very important. So now if we refresh, as you can see, it's still very much vertically aligned. Perfect. And here we have all of the methods that we have discussed so far in the same page. So I just had here the container class that just adds a couple attributes, the background color, the height, and the margin bottom to be a bit spaced out, and then each method gets its own class, and then we can see all the properties here. Okay, and well, we can see that of course they all work right now, but the first test would be, what if we have more than one line of text in here? So more generally is, what if the height of the element grows in size for whatever reason? Okay, so it doesn't specifically apply to text, but in our case we're going to test it using the text that we have here at hand. So I'm going to say here test, and I'm just going to add this word a few times, maybe a couple more, and let's add a couple more, and there we go. Okay, now let's take a look. So first things first, we have the display flex method, and this works perfectly fine. We have those two lines vertically aligned. They are not horizontally aligned, but that's not the point of this video. You can horizontally align this if you want, using something like text align center. That's very straightforward, but that's not what we're talking about. And yeah, this one passes the test perfectly. Cool. The second one, well, it doesn't work well for more than one line, because only the first line is actually, vertically aligned, and once the element grows in size, it no longer gets aligned. You have to do some calculations, and of course it's not aligned, because if we do select this element, you would notice that it if I take a look here at the computed, the size is 37 pixels. Remember, in the calculator I plugged in 16 pixels, and that's not the same thing, and that's why we are not actually centered. We would have to change the calculations for it to be centered. Same thing for the next one, except here the padding is on the container, but it's the same exact result. Alright, then there is a table cell solution, which surprisingly works very well, no problems here. And then the fifth method here, using the line height solution, seems right, but there's something missing. Like, the second line is nowhere near to be found. So what's up with that? Well, if we comment out this the method 6 that we have here, you'll notice it's behind that. So disappointingly, it doesn't work for more than one line of text. And yeah, this is kind of to be expected, and it's unfortunate because this only applies to inline elements. Right, and the last method, I'm going to uncomment it, works as well. We don't have any issues here, and the positioning, the absolute positioning of it works without any issues. Great. Now the next test I want to do is to change the container size. So far we tried to change the element size, right? We saw how that turned out. If we change the height right now, let's change the height to, I don't know, let's say 70 pixels. Let's see what happens. So, all right, the flex solution actually works for that. These two padding solutions, of course, they don't do anything, because again, we would have to change that that calculations we did to figure out the padding top that we needed to add. This one actually works surprisingly well, the table cell solution. And then this one, of course, doesn't work because we have to set the line height to be the height of the container. So we're gonna have to change that to 70 if we want it to work. But if the height of the container dynamically changes, this doesn't work well. And the absolute positioning solution is actually pretty good, and it still works perfectly fine. Good. And now, as a last test, I want to add a simple image to all the containers and see what actually happens. So I'm gonna add, let's say here, before the span, all right, I'm gonna add an image. I'll say I have example.jpg, and I'm going to change the, I'm gonna change the width. The width, I'm gonna say, I don't know, let's say 60, just 60 pixels, not too big, so that we can see it on each container. If I refresh this, so now we can see how each method actually behaves. Here we can see that the flex method kind of works, right? We have the image, and next to the text, there's no spacing or anything weird behind this, just the image is stretched, which is a bit strange, but well, what we can do is just simply, I have here in my clipboard a simple rule that says for that image you can just add align self-center if you want, and if we save and refresh, you will notice it's just centered and no longer is it stretched. So you can choose whatever you want to do here, but I feel like actually centering the image works well. All right, the second solution doesn't work, but that's because the span that we have here is now a display block. So remember, this span, we have set it here in the method 2. We set it to display block because the padding wouldn't work on inline elements. So we had to set it as a display block, and because of that we have it on a separate line from the image. Of course, to solve this you would have to set the display of the container to flex, but that's already getting back to the first solution. Well, the third solution, well, doesn't really work. We have everything pushed down by a little bit because of that padding that we added to the container itself. So as you can see with green here, we have the container itself. It doesn't really work well, and the text itself is vertically aligned to the image, but only to the bottom of the image. It works if you want it to look like this, but it's not vertically aligned in the middle. Next up is the table cell solution. So the table cell solution almost works, like it's fine, the image is there, the text is on the side, but it has some peculiar spacing between it and the image that I cannot even select. It just appears there. What's up with that? Well, that is really because of the width that we have added here. So remember, we have added here at the method 4 with the display table, we have added a width 100% for the table itself. The way this would look without that width 100% is like so. So all this empty space here is actually distributed between the cells, and I think it's distributed based on the size of each cell. The algorithm might vary from browser to browser though. So right now, when we set it at width 100%, you can see that there's a spacing for this one, and this spacing is because the image is about half as large as the text itself in terms of width, and then this spacing here, you can see it's almost double as the other spacing. So it has a little bit of spacing, but it still kind of works. That's fine. The next method kind of fails, interestingly, because the text is no longer aligned even though we added an image. That's a bit peculiar, but the solution would be to set the vertical align to be middle, so this is the method 5, to the span, and, well, this is not going to fix everything, and you have to also set for this same exact method, I'm going to set the images vertical align middle. Alright, and if I try to do this, you will see that now it kind of behaves the same as the flex solution. So that's perfectly fine. So if you set the vertical align element on all the elements that are in line in that container, that works fine with this line height solution. Alright, okay, on to the last one. As you can see, it added the image perfectly fine. We don't have any issues. We have the text right next to it. That's what we would expect. And as a last test, I just want to move the image so that it's on the right of the text. Okay, so I'm gonna just select all of them here. Okay, I'm gonna move it after the span. What's going to happen? If I refresh this page, well, let's see the results. So for the flex solution, okay, that's kind of what we would expect, right? We have the image here. It's now vertically aligned because we told it to be, but it's right after the text. Perfectly fine. Cool. The padding solution, again, we have kind of the same issue, just the same issue backwards, because now the text is first on its own line, and then the image is separate. Okay, it stays there lonely, not even inside the container. The third solution has the same problem. The whole content is pushed down. We looked at that. The fourth solution still has the text vertically aligned at the middle of the component. It's just that the image is way far ahead, so that's kind of a problem sometimes. I think if you ever want to have elements after this one, you'll have to play around with the table cells and their properties. That's going to be a bit tricky. The fourth solution works pretty well, surprisingly. Even though it doesn't support multiple lines, this works well if you need elements even after the text. Perfectly fine. And now the last solution, the one with the absolutely positioned element, shows its caveat, and that is that it's taken out of the context of normal flow. So therefore, the image doesn't see the text as being there, and the text just appears on top of it. Okay, and that's not great. If you want to position elements after the text that you have vertically aligned, you're going to have issues with this solution. So all in all, I think we can all agree that display flex with align self center or align item center on the container works the best so far, and it passes all the tests, right? We had some solutions that worked in some cases, and of course, if you just need inline elements, the fifth solution also works well. It's perfectly fine, but it only works for inline elements, right? That's kind of the caveat to this one. The rest all failed in some very weird and strange ways, but you're gonna have to deal with those later down the line. And that's about it regarding vertically aligning elements to the center of the container. If you do have any questions, leave in the comments below or on our Discord server, as well as if you have feedback or suggestions about topics that I should talk about, of course, leave them down in comments below, because I read every single one of them, and based on those, I usually make videos. And also please leave a comment down below if you found another way of centering the elements vertically to the middle of a container. It would be interesting to see. Maybe one of them would be better than even the one that I listed here. That would be amazing. But I hope I covered all the main ones that people use in general. Of course, I'm going to leave in the description below the source code that I have created here and a couple links to the documentation I used for this video. That's about it. Take care.